I'm George Pierrot, your host on the World Adventure Series. My guest is Stan Midgley, famous from coast to coast as the Mark Twain with a camera. He's going to take us riding to all the beauty spots of the Canadian Rockies, riding on his own bicycle. I was brought up in the shadow of the Canadian Rockies. They're one of my favorite spots on earth. Stan Midgley, our guest, has spent a lot of time bicycling all over the Rockies. Stan, how'd you happen to tour the Rockies on a bicycle?
Well, this is the kind of country you should see slowly. Most tourists go too fast when they're going through the mountains. As a result, they don't realize what they saw, if they saw anything. They're kind of bored when they go fast, but if you see this kind of country slowly, it's almost like reading a book instead of looking at the cover or just the pictures in the book. Also, it's good exercise. I lost 25 pounds with the bike in the Canadian Rockies, and on me that looks good.
Okay, Stan, you've converted me. I'm all ready to go bicycling with you. Let's start for the Canadian Rockies.
That's the train leaving Banff. This is the train that I came in on with my bicycle. Of course, a lot of other tourists had come in on it too, and they got on the bubble top buses. That's the last bus going up empty, but the other tourists have gone up to the hotels and motels. There's nobody left except a vulture up there on the post waiting for stragglers. But here's where we meet the straggler. I check the bicycle in there. I do this quite often, take the bicycle on the train. It rides as baggage, free of charge. Sometimes they have a handling fee on these railroads, but I do this to different parts of the country and then start right off the station platform with my 50 pounds of freight. That's about what I'm carrying, and you can carry a load like that on a bike. Of course, it sways around a bit. Get too much weight on the back end of anything and you'll find it's awkward, but you get used to that sway by the time you've ridden up here to the main street of Banff. That's Cascade Mountain, right up Main Street of Banff. It's 9,836 feet high. The city of Banff is only about 4,500 feet elevation. So most of these mountains rise a mile above you right here. That's the famous Banff Springs Hotel above Bow Falls on the Bow River. It's kind of a flat waterfall, but it's a tremendous volume of water. The Bow River comes from 50 or 60 melting glaciers up in the Lake Louise region, 40 or 50 miles away. And in summertime, as the weather warms up, it's a big roaring stream. You're about a mile and a half down the Bow River from the city of Banff. About the middle of July every year, they have their annual Indian Days. This lasts for several days over the weekend and a few more days in the city of Banff every year. The Stoney Indians come back from the reservation for several days of parades and games.
We'll return to the Canadian Rockies right after a short message. You know, Stan, certain lakes around the world are famed for their beauties. For instance, in Italy, Lake Como, Lake Lucerne in Switzerland, Lake Chuzenji in Japan, perhaps Loch Lomond in Scotland. What, compared to one of these, would you say about Lake Louise?
Well, Lake Louise is very different from all of these other lakes. It's a fairly small lake, a little over a mile in length, but it's certainly one of the most beautiful lakes in the world. And after all, we're going there next, so you can decide for yourself about Lake Louise. Of course, it's going to take us 2 days to get there on a bicycle because it's 40 miles. The Trans-Canada Highway has been completed, and you have a road that you could make in about 1 hour in an automobile, but I'm going to take the old road because there's so much to see in between Banff and Lake Louise. This is the Trans-Canada Highway. The way it is today was completed a few years ago and takes you right across the Canadian Rockies on 4 wide lanes. It's very nice on a bicycle, but the worst part of it was that automobiles go roaring by you at 70 or 80 miles an hour, and you know the driver isn't looking at you, he's looking at the scenery. So I got off the Trans-Canada Highway as fast as I could and took Route 1A. 1A is the old road, and right away you begin to see things you never see on those super highways. These bighorn sheep were right down there beside the road, and isn't he handsome? Of course, what he sees in her, I don't know, but the whole family was down here, right beside the old road. And you'll find they're there nearly any time you come along. That is, there'll be some bighorn sheep, maybe up on the cliffs, if they aren't right down there beside the road. There happens to be a little salt and sulfur in the mud there, and these animals never get enough salt. This is lunchtime, first day out of Banff. Canadian banana. Now, I went 17 miles the first day. That isn't very far, I know, but Johnson Canyon is 17 miles from Banff. It's on the old road. The superhighway is over the other side of the Bow River, but lots of tourists will come over here to Johnson Canyon on the side road, and they walk up 1 mile up this trail along this box canyon with all its waterfalls. In fact, there were so many tourists on this trail that you're elbowing people out of the way for a mile up here to this first waterfall. But if you go another mile, you get away from most of the tourists. 1 mile seems to be the point of no return of most people walking nowadays. This upper waterfall is about the height of Niagara, and that's 2 miles up the trail. There's a big campground here at Johnson Canyon. I'd ridden the bicycle 17 miles that day. I hadn't ridden the bike for 2 years, so that night supper tasted better up here for some reason or other. Of course, later on you get used to riding a bike, but it takes about 2 weeks before you think you're going to live on one of these bicycle trips. Right in the middle of the night, it started to rain. That's the lowest point of your life, when rain starts hitting you in the face. But I just pulled up the tarp and let it rain, not knowing that all night that sock was out in the rain in the dark. And I don't carry extra socks. You don't carry extra anything on a bicycle trip. Even so, you have an awful load of about 50 pounds of cameras and camping equipment and film. Mother Bear didn't want Junior down in the road here. So she said woof, and the bear went right up until she says, okay, now it's all right to come down, because Mother Bear is giving the cubs a lesson in how to make a living, the way bears make a living in national parks. They pick out a place where there's a sign that says penalty $500, because they know that that sign reminds the tourists to feed bears. At least they all seem to feed bears. Everywhere you go in the national parks, you see tourists feeding bears, and of course you shouldn't do it. It's bad for the bears. Of course, sometimes it's bad for the tourists. We have more left-handed tourists used to feed bears in places like Yellowstone and the Canadian Rockies, right-handed. But if you've been in that country in the fall, you'd know why you shouldn't feed bears. Some of those bears are still out there, and they're beginning to starve to death at just the time of year that they should be getting fat and strong to survive 40 below zero in a hollow log. So you're almost signing a bear's death warrant when you get into those habits of depending on tourists for a living. I was going on along after that little storm went by. You see so much more from a bicycle. Of course, that's what you see right there 90% of the time, but you appreciate it more when you're riding a bike. You're going slower the way you should in country like this, and you're working for it. Anything that comes too easy is no good in this world. Over the other side of the Bow River, beyond the railroad, I could hear the highway. The superhighway sounded like rockets going by. But here's the old road. Nobody's on it. You're following the railroad. This is the main line of the Canadian Pacific Railroad. You might say it's Canada's lifeline. And you follow the river and the railroad for 35 or 36 miles. You pass Temple Mountain. That's the highest mountain you see between Banff and Lake Louise. It's 11,636 feet high. For 36 miles, it's an easy bicycle ride. You don't climb much till you leave the river and the railroad, and then you climb about 400 feet in 4 miles. This is the campground at Lake Louise, and keep it clean. That's nice. There were lots of people camping here, but I picked a quiet place over on the edge, away from the crowds, because otherwise you listen to people talking and laughing most of the night, and you have so many people with automobile radios going that you appreciate a quiet place when you're on a bike trip. Lake Louise is what we call a morning subject, so take your pictures in the morning. Now here at sunset, this is Little Herbert Lake, about 8 miles from Lake Louise. And it's really prettier at sunset than famous Lake Louise, but for sunrise, you'll never beat Lake Louise. All you have to do is get up about 4:30 in the morning and be out here shortly after. You'll never forget the sight as the mountains turn red on these long days of late June and early July. This is really the sunrise lake of the world. It faces exactly the right direction. But you'll be freezing to death out here. There'll be a few other die-hard photographers up that early in the morning, but that's all. It begins to warm up 2 or 3 hours later. But you watch the light change from red through orange, yellow into normal daylight. And then when it warms up, you begin to see the tourists. A few people will be in the swimming pool in mid-morning, but more in the afternoon. They heat the water in that pool, otherwise you'd hear that diver scream halfway across the country. Because if they took that water straight out of Lake Louise, it would be just about freezing, because Lake Louise is fresh out of all the glaciers. There she blows. But take your pictures in the morning at Lake Louise. There's nothing to see in the afternoon. The light is wrong, I mean. It faces, that is, you will be facing southwest with the sun behind you in the morning, but by noon the light is wrong for the best photography. You have these Iceland poppies in bloom all summer long out in front of the hotel. 5 miles away is this sedan lift that was just built about 1959. It takes you up the side of Mount Whitehorn. You can't miss this because it starts right at the side of the Trans-Canada Highway, about 5 miles from Lake Louise. It's a 2-mile ride. It takes about 20 minutes to get up here. You're going away from Lake Louise, so you get a grandstand view of the whole Lake Louise group of mountains. And from the top, you see about 50 mountains, 15 or 20 glaciers. But most tourists never get to know the mountains. That's one of the unfortunate things about our national parks in the West. Tourists take a short look and they've seen it. They never get to know these mountains. And yet the Canadians put out very nice signs for you. You could get to know them easy. Always use these mountain finders. Sometimes I'll spend a half an hour with the mountain finder. Maybe you've seen these things at the viewpoints around the West. Just put the arrow on whatever you're looking for and look through the pipe and it'll zero right in on some mountain maybe 40 miles away. But tourists think all mountains look alike and they let it go at that. Well, you could say that about people if you're foolish enough. You could say all people look alike, and if you never got to know them, you might believe that. But you'll find mountains have character too. You even get so you can recognize them from the other side. They point out everything for you here, this viewpoint. Now let's get out.
Well, that was a fitting end to a beautiful sequence. We'll return to the Canadian Rockies in just a moment. So far, we've been in Banff National Park. Where next, Stan?
Well, next we'll go over in Yoho National Park. That's on the British Columbia side of the Canadian Rockies. Lake Louise is not on the main Trans-Canada Highway. It's about 4 miles off on a side road. There's a cutoff road that saves going over that side road twice. It's about 8 miles on this gravel road. And it's worth going on a gravel road because it does save 4 miles. It's downhill most of the way. In fact, it seemed kind of funny coming down a hill, and at the bottom of the hill you arrive at the top of the pass, Kicking Horse Pass, 5,334 feet above sea level. This is where you leave the province of Alberta and go into British Columbia. You've just left the Atlantic slope of the Continental Divide, and ahead of you the Pacific slope. It's about 15 miles downhill. Of course, that's the most important thing anybody could tell you about Kicking Horse Pass. 15 miles downhill ahead of you. You have one more mile of this cutoff road before you get back to the main Trans-Canada Highway. You pass 3 little lakes here, and just the other side of the lakes is the highway and also the Canadian Pacific Railroad. A couple of helper engines are going down for another freight train over there. And in a few minutes I came to the railroad, and that's a busy railroad, so, well, it's a busy auto road too. And you have California drivers up here in Canada just as much as any place else. But now you're back on the road, so watch the cars and the trains too. That's a busy railroad. It's the main line of the Canadian Pacific, but we're safely across. Oh, it's wonderful to be back to civilization again. But the best thing here is that you have 14 more miles downhill on the superhighway. You're leaving Kicking Horse Pass, going down Kicking Horse Canyon of the Kicking Horse River. I like that name. A surveyor got kicked by a horse when they were building the Canadian Pacific Railroad about 1880. They have this big sign on the side of the highway to point out the famous spiral tunnels to you. And when you stand beside that sign, you look down on the railroad. That's the morning passenger train going into the lower spiral tunnel. It had a fine double header of steam engines. And the train goes straight into the mountain, but a minute and a half later it comes out over at the left, because here's the same picture a minute and a half later. The train has turned completely around inside the mountain. It went 3/5 of a mile. It crosses its own track at the right. Then it goes over in the mountain on the other side of the valley and does the same thing in another spiral tunnel. And here it comes back about 15 minutes later, but now it's above you. They built these spiral tunnels about 1910. Before 1910, they had a 4.5% grade in here. It was just too much for a mainline railroad. It took about 6 engines to get a train up in the old days, but by building those 2 spiral tunnels, they were able to reduce the grade to about 1/3 of what it used to be. So now 2 steam engines can take a train up where it used to take 6, and of course 1 diesel engine takes 80 cars in a freight train right up that with no trouble at all. Took me about an hour to go 10 feet right here through this patch of strawberries. July is wild strawberry time in the Rockies. And right at the foot of the hill, when you've come down Kicking Horse Pass, there's a road turns off and takes you up into Yoho Valley. It's notorious for avalanches, and back in the middle of winter, several square miles of snow cut loose up above timberline and came right down through the forest, and it took the forest right along with it and dumped everything across the highway and across the river. It doesn't bother the river to have a forest dumped on it like this, but it takes the road crew all spring to dig this mess off the highway, because it's hard to bulldoze snow off a road when it's full of 2-foot logs. But it shows the power of an avalanche. Of course, nobody was there when it happened, but it happened sometime last winter. Ow! How do you like that grapefruit? Even in a can, it gets you in the eye. It's a 7-mile dead-end road up in Yoho Valley. It's pretty steep in a few places, but you can get up here in an hour and a half or so on a bike. And at the end of the road is Takaka Falls. Yoho is a good Indian name. It means exactly the same thing in Indian as it does in American. Because when the Indians saw this waterfall, they said, quote, "Yoho," unquote. It's one of the world's finest waterfalls. It's about the height of the Empire State Building, 1,200 feet. The only thing any higher in North America would be Yosemite Falls, California. Takaka Falls is the 3rd highest waterfall in the world. You can sit on the front porch of Yoho Valley Lodge and look right out at this waterfall, and it's almost like watching fireworks. A high waterfall changes as you watch it. It's fascinating just to look at this thing. Of course, this is a rather cool day when not much snow and ice was melting in the glacier up above, because here's a hot day, and you'll notice the difference in volume of water coming down when it gets up around 70 or 80 degrees. Of course, 70 or 80 is very hot in the Canadian Rockies. But the wind bats it all around. Of course, this is a pretty windy guy we have here. But you can sit and stare at a high waterfall by the hour, almost like watching fireworks. Well, it's downhill for 7 miles when you leave here. We get out the road map and see where to go next. And kabong, oh, you shouldn't read a road map at 40 miles an hour. But of course, the motorists do it at 70 miles an hour with the same kind of results. You get back on the main Trans-Canada Highway and you go on west past this little town of Field. Field is just a division point on the railroad where they put on the helper engines to take the train up Kicking Horse Pass. A few miles beyond Field, you pass this natural bridge. You can walk right across on solid rock like that man is doing. The whole Kicking Horse River goes through that little hole. That doesn't look like a very big river, but really it's a huge one. All the water of Takaka Falls, plus the main Yoho River, plus the main Kicking Horse is going right through that little hole. The Kicking Horse is a big branch of the Columbia. Well, I stopped for a drink there. It must have been spring water. There's a side road takes you from the natural bridge up to Emerald Lake, and the road is cut right through the trees, straight for 5 miles. Emerald Lake is about a 2-hour trip by bus, I believe, from Lake Louise. So it took me a day and a half to get over here on a bicycle because I was enjoying myself, taking my time. Emerald Lake Chalet is a quiet place in among the trees, the way a mountain resort should look. They have a lot of these smaller places in the Canadian Rockies, but maybe you'd better reserve in advance because they're pretty crowded in July and August because that's their summertime. The rest of the year's winter up there. And if you don't have a reservation, perhaps it's a good idea to carry camping equipment because more and more people do that nowadays. They have fine campgrounds all through the Canadian Rockies. Now, I was alone all the time on this bicycle trip, and people always say, "Who is taking your picture?" So I show you how I do it. This is the way I take all these pictures of myself. Set the camera up, set up my little gizmo that gives me about 20 seconds to get down the road. Take a deep breath, as you're going to hurry. Now the gizmo is running, but the camera hasn't started yet. I always hang that hanky in there so that when the camera starts, the handkerchief will fall to the ground. But there's a little clockwork gizmo over at the left side of your picture that is slowly pulling a bar out from behind the release on the camera. There, the handkerchief fell, and I can see the hanky fall from way down the road. Then I know the camera started. Now it's taking my picture. And of course it goes right on running, taking my picture at about $5 a minute for film, so get back and stop the thing. And hey, stupid, remember the handkerchief. Yeah, I'm always forgetting hankies. If you ever find a handkerchief anywhere in America, it probably belongs to me because I'm absent-minded. Then I pack up the old iron monster and get going again. But that's the way I take all these pictures of myself. You all right? It's all right.
Now that we all know how to take our own pictures, let's pause a moment for a short message. Stan, you've been bicycling and camping for weeks. What equipment do you take with you?
Usually the ordinary lightweight camping equipment, sleeping bag and a tarp and a cooking kit. A few dried foods just in case of emergency, but usually you can pick up whatever you need on a bicycle trip at some kind of a crossroads store just about every day.
And you ought to have fishing tackle. Certainly in the Canadian Rockies you should, shouldn't you?
Yes, I always take a fly rod on these trips, and I had a fine time fishing in a lot of those backcountry lakes.
Well, thanks, Stan, for a wonderful bicycle trip. We all lost 25 pounds, and we'll be seeing you next time.